Hi there, I'm Robert Hawking, the host of The Creators. In March of 2020, the world shut down. Nowhere was this more acutely felt than in schools. Almost overnight, 1.2 billion students were shut out of their schools, and parents and all of society had to deal with the transition to virtual classrooms. And this is the environment where we found this week's entrepreneur, Fred Dixon. Fred's a very unassuming computer scientist. In fact, if you met him, you wouldn't necessarily think of him as an entrepreneur. But as you'll learn in this two-part interview, all Fred ever wanted when he graduated university was to work for himself. So after launching and exiting two ventures, he found himself with an idea that came from a master's thesis written by a friend that examined the potential of online learning. In 2008, when they launched BigBlueButton, there were 175 video conferencing applications, and 0 of them were built for education. Over 12 years, Fred and his founding partner developed the world's only open source application, a model, if you're unfamiliar with it, that's based on a global community of developers constantly refining an application based on the needs of, in this case, teachers. In March last year, their tiny company of 12 people found themselves at the center of getting kids back to school. And 18 months later, they've now hosted almost 3 billion minutes of online learning delivered by hundreds of thousands of teachers in more than 50 languages. Fred's story is one of purpose, passion, and circumstance. I know you'll get something from it. Now over to Fred. Hey everybody, this is Robert Hawking, and I would like to welcome our guest today, my good friend, longtime friend, and a serial entrepreneur, Fred Dixon, who is the CEO and founder of Blindside Networks, and also the co-creator of BigBlueButton, the world's largest open source virtual classroom application. And Fred, I've known for more than 25 through different entrepreneurial ventures, and so pleased to welcome you today. Fred, thanks for making some time.
My pleasure, Robert. Glad to be here.
So Fred, let's start. You've got a technology background, and for a lot of people who have an interest in tech, naturally they're not necessarily thinking about just getting a job somewhere. They're thinking about how they might be able to turn that into a venture. Why don't you start way back in the midst of time and talk to us about, what you studied, where you worked, and what was the genesis for you deciding to become an entrepreneur?
So I have a mathematics degree. This was at the University of Waterloo before they did computer science, and I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I gave myself 3 years after I graduated from university to start my own company, and I ended up starting in four years. And that was around 1995, but it was a really good time to start a company because the internet was going gangbusters. Like this is the era of, Netscape and Hotmail and all these things were starting up. So I had some ideas about, at that time, a company for doing web-based data analysis. And I raised some venture capital, which eventually raised to about $13.5 million of VC funding, and built a company up. There was about 65 people at the peak. We brought in an outside CEO because I wore a younger man's clothes back then. And I learned a lot. And it was a great ride, and it was eventually sold. And from that, I learned that this is the only thing I want to do in my life, which is try to, create something that has value to people, but more so than just generate revenue. I have a strong desire to create something that has a social benefit to other people around the world. So those two drivers made it that I would always focus on trying to build a company. And this is actually my third company. So I've been at it for a little while.
Now, it's interesting, somebody that comes from a mathematical background where, it's formulaic, and going into the entrepreneurial world doesn't seem like an easy or natural connection. So how did you know, did you come from an entrepreneurial background? Where was the dream born? Because it certainly wasn't because you'd gone to business school, quite the opposite. So how did you decide so early on that this was a move for you?
So I think it has to do with my personality. I would say I'm somewhat introverted. And as an introvert, you tend to do things, yourself. And so the biggest way to do things at scale and have a lot of control over it is to start a company. So I had worked at a number of companies. I learned a ton, but I really wanted to have that chance to build a company from scratch. And like most entrepreneurs at the time, I mean, if I could talk to my younger self, I would say, you did the right thing. There would be different ways to do it that would be a bit easier. But it was a combination of I thought I could do it, and I was too naive to know how difficult it was. So I learned a lot along the way, and I benefited from some good mentors. And because I had a technical background, I was able to attract other technical people. And that's how a lot of the high tech companies start. It's usually a core group of engineers who create something, proof of concept, get some first customers. And the experience I had in my first company, which grew quite a lot, and I had a chance to work with some people in sales and marketing, I learned a lot from them. And I think the thing I learned in terms of building the company was a solution-based approach to selling, which is not, hey, I'm selling you a used car, would you like to buy it? It's like, I want to understand the problem you have. I want to hear what your ideal solution would be. And I want to try to align what I have to enable you to implement your ideal solution. And in that way, whatever we create is an enabler. And as long as we have really good alignment, and there's a market need, and the market's growing, and we be able to differentiate ourselves, all those good things. But the nuts and bolts of it come down to being able to find a market, convince people in the market that you can enable them to implement the solution that they're looking for, and then be really persistent in terms of building that solution. You hear things about, let's do a hack weekend and we'll start up a company and we'll throw some prototypes together and we'll code for 48 hours and we'll have a proof of concept. Sure, yes, maybe, possibly. Very unlikely. The reality of it is you have to be persistent in a market, and you don't have to know a market per se, it helps, but you have to have a really good idea of how to approach the problem and provide a solution. And that's just talking to lots of people, listening to lots of people. So I think I said earlier that I was introverted. In some ways, yes, but I'm very comfortable speaking in front of people. When I speak about what we're trying to do, I feel passionate about it. I know what we're doing. I know how the value of it is. And I guess one other thing with starting a company is you get to work with other smart people. People who start companies and are successful are not dumb. Not that I needed any sort of validation, but it's nice to know that the work that you're doing, and as you grow a company, you get to typically work for really smart people. And we're going to get into this in a little bit, I presume, but the basis of our company is open source technology. So we do a virtual classroom built on open source, and our focus is to make the most teacher-centric virtual classroom in the world. So we focus on one market. I learned that from my first company as well. And in doing so, the people who are orbiting around open source projects and working on them and contributing to them, these are highly motivated, very smart people. And I've had the pleasure to work with some really smart people around the world in building out the BigBlueButton project. And, again, it's not an overnight effort, right? There's no 48 hours here. We've been at this for 13 years, and it still feels like we're a company growing. But in that time frame, I've managed to make connections with people all around the world, build some really deep relationships with some incredibly smart people who I admire a lot. And we all work very hard together to continue to improve our project over and over, version after version. And what that means is it just gets better and better for our target market with each release.
Right. So I'm curious about that first experience. I mean, it's funny because you and I were both early on in ventures when we met, and for me, it doesn't feel that long ago, but in real terms, it's 25 years. I mean, think about what's changed in 25 years. Everything. So I'm just curious, what a lot of the people that might be watching this interview are going to be people that are contemplating a venture. Having gone through that experience, I mean, I know because I know you, I know that it wasn't always an easy experience. When you look back on that first venture, what were the big things that you took away from that? The biggest lessons that you learned that shaped your approach to developing your next business. You commented a little bit about solution selling, having dedicated focus, et cetera. But what are some of the other lessons that you learned through that experience? Because, of course, you conceptualized the business, you brought in partners, you found investors. 25 years ago, raised $13 million. I mean, $13 million is a decent raise now. Back then, it was incredible. Like, you were doing this all for the first time. So, that was an amazing learning experience. What were the big lessons that you took away from that?
Right. So there's sort of the first company I had, which I raised 13 million. I did a second company, which raised zero money and made close to zero money. But that was during the dot-com bust. But I was hell-bent to start all over again because I didn't want to be idle. I wanted to take another shot at it. I learned a lot. That second company didn't be successful. I spent a stint as a VP of sales at a third company. And this is my fourth company, Blindside Networks, the third of which I co-founded. And so there's really two answers to that question. There's what was Fred like 25 years ago when I didn't really know much, full of energy, and what was it like to start that fourth company? And I think the better answer might be looking at that fourth company, because you have a bigger pedestal on which to stand upon now in terms of access to information. There's lots of success stories. There's Y Combinator. There's lots of roadmaps out there for the nuts and bolts of starting a company. That part there's commonality amongst it. If you think about what differentiates an entrepreneur, one who succeeds and one who perhaps doesn't, there's a couple factors. I would have to say there's a sense that you are going to make it, and that you have this inner drive to overcome obstacles, and there will be a lot along the way. But I listened to Simon Singh on a podcast recently, and he gave an example of he's at a conference, and there's a group of people offering free bagels. And it's a busy conference, and so there's a lineup, and there's these tables, and there's all these bagels that are there, and people are making bagels up, but there's a lineup. So he goes to his friend and says, "Hey, let's go get some free bagels." And his friend looks at the line and says, "The lineup's too long." And Simon Singh says, "Free bagels." And his friend goes, "No, it's too long of a line." And the analogy is, are you focused on this goal, or are you looking at the obstacles along the way? Because if you look at the obstacles, there's no bagels, right? You're not getting the bagels. So I think one thing for starting a company, if I was to say to other entrepreneurs, and not to discount any of the well-trodden advice that other people would give, is you really gotta want the bagel. Like, you are thinking about the bagel, what is it going to taste like? And I don't care how long the line is, because the length of the line doesn't matter, notwithstanding you run out of food or water or shelter or anything. If it's going to take you 6 months to build a product for a market that you believe you can provide a solution, that's the obstacle. That's the line. But at the end of that, you get a shot, right? And maybe entrepreneurism is a little like partial reinforcement. We're in the Skinner box, we're pecking the lever, and every now and then some food drops down. It's like, man, if I just keep pecking this lever, more food's going to drop down. So to put into concrete terms, this company, that Blindside Networks, it develops virtual classroom systems. So how did it start? Is I was networking around Carleton University, and I was looking for other students to mentor because I had gotten a lot of mentorship in the past. That's my earlier self from my first company, when I didn't know much. A lot of people helped me out along the way, and I kind of felt like I could pass on some knowledge to others and get some satisfaction from it. And so they showed me a couple of projects that were going on in the university, and there was this one that had been built out, a web conferencing system based on open source technology, and it had undergone about a year of development, and it was in use at Carleton in the Technology Innovation Management Program. And I met the person who wrote it, really great guy, and I talked to some of the professors, and they were like, "Hey, this is great." And they were teaching engineers how to be entrepreneurs, and they said, "Hey, if you want to start a company around this, we can't give you money, but we'll be your first customer." And to me, that was the light, because there is a huge difference between 0 customers and 1 customer. And I felt like if I had 1 customer that I could work with and rev this and improve it, and then I look at, there's 4,500 degree granting institutions in North America, there's many more around the world. And then I just asked myself, is the internet getting faster? Are the browsers getting better? Are computers getting faster? Is it likely that there will be more education delivered online in the future? There was yes to all four of those. And the software that eventually my co-founder, Richard Alam, wrote was building on some pieces that were just becoming available as open source, that were enough to put together a web conferencing system, that the teacher could upload slides, talk to students, chat, share webcams. Like the pieces were there. And I thought, okay, we'll do this. Let's go for it. And so what I said to Richard was this: I can't tell if this is going to be successful, Richard, but I can tell that if you and I spend 2 years full time working on this, then we will know at the end of that 2 years whether we'll be successful or not. I'm willing to go for it. Are you? And he said yes. So we set it up so that each of us would have 2 years full on investment in this. And some good things happened along the way. We got another. Go ahead.
Let me just stop you there for a second. I do want to go back to that experience of when you had your first company, because you are a very different kind of entrepreneur from a lot of the entrepreneurs that I meet. You certainly, some of the qualities that you have that are consistent with a lot of the people I meet is, you're very driven. You're quite single-minded. I find that you really adapt well to the challenges in the decision-making process, which is in a constant state of flux when you are running a business. But I know as well that the different parts of you as an entrepreneur you tend to be very, very laid back. One of the things I've always seen about you is money is not even a consideration. And in terms of what drives you and what gets you out of bed. Now, the reality is a lot of the entrepreneurs I meet are, really about self-actualizing through business. I've met very few that say it's about the money. But I want to go back to that first experience, because that was your first taste of being in business. And at the time, your first venture felt very traditional in its structure. But coming out of that, something seemed to shift in you. You seemed to want to play the game by a different set of rules. That's certainly my impression of you. And I'm curious if that's the case. And if that's the case, what was it that kind of, from that first experience, changed your approach and your thinking to entrepreneurship?
It's a good question. So I think for any person trying to reach a goal, you could kind of look at two motivations. You're either repelled away from something or you're pulled towards something. So the analogy might be, I look at someone who's been a developer for 30 years and say, I don't think that's for me. I want something different. What that different may be, I'm not quite sure yet. So for being an entrepreneur in my first company, I really didn't want a career in a larger company. That's where I was essentially at, in a company called Bell and Other Research, which was a great company, but unfortunately is no longer around. And so I got lots of experience there, but I didn't want to stay there. I wanted to start a company. And I felt like the time to do it is when you're young and lots of energy and there are opportunities, and the internet had just happened, right? So I remember using the browser, Netscape Navigator and Spyglass and other browsers at university in 1992. And then I left to have a full-time job. And by the fall of 1995, I had left and started a company. But in those years, like, the internet just blew up. Like, Netscape went public and it was worth so much. So there was an opportunity. The timing was right. And I believed it was worth, going for it, because I could always get a job. I just wouldn't be able to do the thing I wanted to do. So, the other analogy I have in my life that's kind of is I took karate for many years. And I learned one thing in taking karate, that if you want to learn karate quickly and purposefully, you spar with the black belt. You're in front of the head of the class, and you spend as much time with them as you can. And you may go home a bit bruised and sore and beaten up, but you feel great because you're just learning so much. So I could not learn what I needed to just staying at my job. I had to start a company. I had to go out. So that first company, I was kind of repelled away from this idea of what, other career paths are or could have been. By the time I got to my fourth company, that I worked at, the third one I started, I was pulled towards something. I didn't, I knew I could do it. I knew I could start a company. It was now, what is that company going to be? And I think I got lucky in terms of finding this project, which again had been in development for a year in a market that I cared a lot about. I mean, I had a university degree. I mean, we all went through school, and there was a social benefit to what I could do. And so access to education is key to raising families, communities, countries out of poverty. We grew up in a very privileged society in that there was a school down the street. We had the option of going to university. We didn't have fear going down the road. We had food, eat. I mean, it was none of us were, I know you, Robert, like neither of us grew up with any great means, but we did pretty well. Part of that is the society we live in, and that we were very lucky to grow up where we were. I know that a lot of people around the world don't have that opportunity, but the key to have opportunity is education. So I felt that if we were successful, there would be two measurements for success. One is, could we build an open source virtual classroom that enabled people around the world to raise themselves out of poverty or to build a better life? And that meant maybe there's a school in Jakarta or India or Pakistan or South Africa that found our software and were able to provide their students who couldn't make it to class access to class and let the students complete their education. So that there's no money there. That is pure social benefit and satisfaction of making the world a better place. I mean, I think of it like this. We have one life. What lever can we pull on that will affect the other people's lives around us? I always believe that there's really only one goal in life, and that's to make the world a better place. Because by raising up the world, I raise myself up. And I mean, I know maybe it sounds corny, but when you know that what you're working on is helping other people around the world, past a certain point of financial stability, that's the real value. That's the real reward, which I think is why a lot of entrepreneurs become philanthropists, right? They've made their money, they just don't know what to do with it. So they start giving it away. Well, I think this project, by one measure, can be how much can we enable people around the world to have access to an online learning. And the other measurement, of course, is the success of the company itself.
Thanks for making it to the end of this first part of our two-part interview with Fred Dixon of BigBlueButton. Click through to the second part to discover how Fred and his team managed explosive growth and where he sees the world of online learning and his business going. And please remember to hit like and subscribe for more of the human stories behind businesses that inspire us.